It is Friday. Welcome again to yet another lesson. This is English First Additional Language. It is that time of the week, the last lesson for the week. I hope everybody is doing okay. And if you are there with us today, may you please say hi in the chat so we can see you that you are there with us for today's lesson. Okay, there is a couple of highs in the chat. Thank you everybody. Thank you so much for joining us in today's lesson. It's going to be good. It's going to be great. Yes, it's Friday. It's Friday. So without a waste of time, let us get started with the lesson of the day. All right. So in case you are wondering what we will be doing in today's lesson, this is it. So in today's lesson, we would be learning about how to write a review of a story or a novel. So you realize that this is one of your transactional texts and you may be required to write it. Yes, so that is why this is what we are doing today. It's one of the transactional texts that which we are going to learn to write today. So before we go too far, let us briefly recap what we did yesterday. So remember yesterday we learned about synonyms, antonyms, homonyms, as well as paronyms. Do you remember? We said that a synonym is a word that means the same as another word in the same language. You do remember that, right? And we continue to say that an antonym is a word that means the opposite as another word in the same language. So we basically said that antonyms are basically opposites, okay? So antonyms are words which are opposites of each other. For example, left and right, up and down, male and female, beautiful and ugly, few and many, etc., etc. Then we also learned about homonyms. And yesterday I've realized that most of you confuse homonyms with homophones. Okay, so yesterday we only did homonyms. We said that homonyms are words that are spelled the same and they sound the same, right? Okay, we said homonyms are words that are spelled the same and they sound the same when they are pronounced, but they have different meanings. All right, so that is what we learned about it with homonyms. And I've realized some of you were confusing homonyms with homophones. Remember in one of the past lessons when we did homophones, we said that homophones are words which sound the same when they're pronounced, but they are spelled differently and they mean different things. Okay, right? And then we also did paronyms. We said a paronym is a word that comes from the same root word as another word and has a similar meaning. Okay, so that is what we learned yesterday. And if you have a question based on what we did yesterday, I will just take this moment to be quiet and wait for any question you might have from what we did yesterday before we get on with today's lesson. All right, so it seems like there is no question to what we were doing yesterday. So that makes me happy. I'm glad that every one of us we did understand what we learned yesterday. So therefore, without a waste of time, let's continue with the lesson of the day. Remember what we said? We said that today's lesson really will be about how to write the review of a story or of a novel, and you will realize that this is a transactional text, right? So, do you still remember the writing process? Do you still remember the writing process? All right, good. I see the yeses in the chat. So remember that even when you write a review, you would still need to use the writing process, because remember we said what the writing process does. It helps us to plan what we are going to write, so that we can write it in the most meaningful way, so that it can be written logically, so that there could be logical cohesion and coherence with what we will be writing, okay? So that it makes sense to everyone who will be reading it, because you, as the person who writes it, it makes sense to you, you know. You know what it is that which you want to write, but then other people do not know. Therefore, it is very important, it is very essential that you know what you write, so that what you write can be interpreted by other people in the same way as you were aiming to write it. Okay, so that is how it works. That is why with every transactional text we write, we follow the writing process method. Okay, so it doesn't matter what type of a transactional text you write, that method is very, very important to use. Okay, so even in today's lesson we will need to use it, but before we get there, there are some things we may need to learn about how reviews work and how they are. Okay, so remember, if you have questions, if you are lost, you have concerns and everything like that, our group chat is open, so that you can ask your questions and we will be here to help you. Right. So we are on reviews. So one thing about reviews is that reviews seldom follow a set pattern. Okay. So the unlike other transactional texts like postcards or letters or instruction text and other transactional texts we've went through so far, you will realize that with reviews there is seldom a set pattern, because reviews will also depend also on other factors such as what type of review is it. Are you reviewing a novel? Are you reviewing a story? Are you reviewing an album, a game? Are you reviewing a book? Are you reviewing a film? Maybe whatever it is that we should review, it will be sorry it will depend. Okay, so that's why with reviews there is no set pattern, but then there are some things that we need to know, and there are some things that we need to remember when we write a review. Okay, so uh, the second pointer is reviews do not have to cover any specific aspect of the story or the novel which you are reviewing. Okay, so remember, before you write the review about the story or about the novel, obviously you will have read the story first, you will have read the novel first, so that you understand what the story is about, so that you understand what the novel is all about. Do you remember in the past few lessons that which we did, we talked about the features of a literature text, and we said it has features such as characters, the plot, the message and the theme, the setting and the background, and all things like that. Okay, so even here when you write a review, you do not have to be specific, your review doesn't have to be specifically about the characters in the novel, or the message or the theme of that novel, or the plot of that novel, or things like that. Okay, so there is nothing that which you specifically dwell on when you write your review. Okay, I can say that now if I'm writing a review about the adventures of Mr. and Mrs. X, then I write about the character, how Mr. X is, that Mr. X is tall, he's mean, he's jealous, he's all these things, and then I talk about the characteristics of Mrs. X. No, we do not cover any specific aspect of the novel. Okay, we do not do that. Remember that when we review, we talk about everything, like we cover everything about that novel, about that story. Okay, so remember also from the previous lesson when we talked about literature texts, and yes, when we talked about the features of literature texts, I think it was in lesson 23 or lesson 24. So all those things, that those features of the literature text, they really have to be somewhere in the review, because you will realize that without them, then there is no story, there is no novel. Without characters, there's no novel, there's no story. And there is no novel or story which has no characters, or action, or dialogue, or background background to a setting, or a message or a theme. Okay, those are things which are there, and they are contained in every story and in every novel. And it is for that reason that you do not have to cover specific aspects, but you really have to be more comprehensive and cover as much of them as you possibly can. Right? Are we all together? So remember, if you have questions, the chat is open for us to is open for you to ask your questions, and we will reply to them. Okay. So generally, reviewers establish what it is they are reviewing and who is involved. So this is a very important step. Let me just highlight it in red. Okay. So remember that, okay, this is blinding. Let's use a different shade. Right. So generally, reviewers establish what it is they are reviewing and who is involved. So this means that before you review, okay, remember, when you learners will be writing a review, at that point in time, when you write the review, we take you as the reviewer. Okay. So tell me, what do you think it means when you say that reviewers need to establish what it is they're reviewing and who is involved? Please talk to us in the chat to tell us what you think this statement means. So I'll give you just a moment. Okay, so let us see. We have some answers in the chat. All right, we have Favor Gift saying they need to talk about the characters. That is true, Favor Gift. That is one of the things that which will need to be covered. And what this statement actually means is that you you need to establish what it is that you are reviewing. Okay, so what this means is this. It means, is it a novel? Like, you ask yourself what it is that which you are reviewing. Is it a novel? Is it a story? Is it a CD? Is it an album? Is it a movie? Is it whatever it is that which you are reviewing? First, you need to establish. Why? Because once you've established that, then you will know what you are going to write. Okay. So we in this lesson, we want to review a story or a novel, right? So okay, so once we establish that we want to review a novel, then we have established that we want to review a novel. So if we review a novel, then there are some things that which we will need to remember to write about in our review. And those things that which we need to write about in our review. So these are the following things that which we will need to write about when we review a novel. We will need to say something about the plot of that novel, right? Remember what the plot is, ne? As well as the subplot. So remember, the novel will really have a plot, which is the main narrative, or the main plot, okay? The main plot. And inside that main plot, there will be what we call subplot, which is a smaller plot within the main plot. Okay. Therefore, if we then review a novel, we will have to say something about the plot. Okay. The next thing we will need to talk about will be the characters and the characterization of those characters. Remember, if there is a plot, then it means that there are also some characters who are in that plot. Okay, who are in that plot, who are affected by the plot and by how things happen in that novel. Okay. Another thing we will need to talk about will be the role of the narrator. If it happens that that novel has a narrator, then the role of the narrator, we may have to say something about it. We will also have to say something about the setting. Okay, remember when we're talking about the features of a literature text, we said that the setting is where the the story or the novel takes place, and we also understand that the setting of the novel or the setting of the place, it does affect the plot. It also affects the characters and how they are. We also need to say something about the message as well as the theme of that novel. Okay. Not only that, we will also have to talk about the mood and the atmosphere of that novel. Okay. So remember, all these things we did go through them when we went through the literature text in lesson 23, lesson 24, right? So yes, so even when you will be writing your review, you will need to establish these things, because now we have already established that our review would be about a novel. Therefore, all these things I've mentioned, let me mention them again: the plot, the characters, the role of the narrator, the setting, the messages and the themes, as well as the mood and the atmosphere. You have to say something about them, right? Yes. Then remember that in your review, you will have to attempt to be fair, but to be honest. So this is quite tricky, because sometimes to be to really balance being fair and being honest can really be difficult. But this is something you really need to do for your review to be good. You need to be fair but also be honest. Okay. And you should remember that usually when a review is bad, it is merely a personal outpouring of the subjective views of the reviewer. Okay. So what this means is that for you, okay, let's say that you learners, we are asking you to write a review of a love or a romantic novel, but you are somebody who doesn't like romantic novels. Okay, chances are you will write a bad review simply because you do not love romantic novels. You do not like romantic novels. A matter of fact, you hate romantic novels, and for that reason, you may write a bad review because of your because of your views. Okay, so to avoid that, you just need to forget about your views, you know, your subjective views about how much you hate romantic novels, and do the task in hand. All right, okay. So remember, if there's anything you do not understand, the chat is open. Please do ask your questions, and we'll be here to help you and to answer your questions. Right? Sometimes you may need to use some humor in your reviews. Okay. I don't know if you have been reading newspapers. You know, there are several newspapers that almost every week they will be reviewing a book. You know, they will be reviewing a novel, and you realize that there are some reviewers who are really are funny. You know, they have this sense of humor, and even in their reviews they will be using some very funny phrases. Okay, yeah. So okay, now, okay, so one thing also to remember is that reviews, they reflect your response as an individual to a work of art, film, a book, or an occasion, etc. Yes, but remember that in our context here, our review will reflect our responses to a novel or a story. Okay, fine. Then on a review, you will project your own judgment to the work that is presented. So if we are reviewing a novel, so in your review, you'll be judging, you know, like judging or putting your own judgment about what the novel is about and how it was for you. Okay, and one thing you need to remember when you write a review is that you need to, sorry, you need to acknowledge the fact that not everybody will agree with your review. Okay, not everybody will agree with what you are writing there, because there may be this novel, let us say it is called The Adventures of Dr. X. Okay, so you may love that novel because you are a big fan of Dr. X. You review it, you give it a 10 out of 10, and you give the reasons why you give it a 10 out of 10, right? But you will find that there is another person who may review the same work of art, the same novel, and give it a 1 out of 10, saying, you know, this book is a waste of ink, it is a waste of paper, you know, we should be saving the environment instead of printing such books, you know. So yes, you will realize that not everybody will agree with your review, and that is okay. Okay, that is okay. So when you write your review, it is not about who will agree with your review, but it is about you reflecting your own response and projecting your own judgment upon the novel that which you are reviewing. So, like I said, sometimes two reviewers may respond differently to the same text. Okay, so it may be you and me reviewing this novel, and I will say, you know, this novel is so so. So I give it 3 out of 10 because of one, two, three, four, five, six reasons. But as for you, you read the same book, then you give it, you know, you give it 8, you give it 9, okay, and you really are happy, and you give the reasons why you are happy. All right, yeah, right. Then okay, remember that when you do your review, you give relevant facts, right? For example, the name of the author, right? The name of the author, the title of the book, as well as the name of the publisher, as well as the price of that book. Okay, so let me make this example. I am reviewing The Adventures of Dr. X, right? So there is somewhere in my review where I would give the relevant facts, okay? That I will say The Adventure of Dr. X, written by J.D. Ram, okay? Written by J.T. Ram, um, and it was published by XYZ Publishers, and you can get this book at retail stores for 249.95. You know, so these are some relevant facts that which we should we should be there. It is not really about, advertising that work, or maybe recommending it to people because you loved it. And if maybe you didn't love it, it is not about you telling other people not to read the book, telling other people not to buy the novel. Okay, it is more than that. It is just about you giving your opinion, giving your own judgments, expressing your own response about the novel or the story that which you may have read. So this is what writing reviews really is about. And remember, if you have a question, the chat is still open for you to ask your questions, and we will get back to you. All right, and then okay, here I'm going to go through some extra tips to write a review of a novel or a story. Okay, so here tips to help you to write a review of a novel or a story. So you will realize that up until now, I really have been general. Okay, up until now, I really have been general in my approach, but now we are going to go a little bit. We are going to be a bit more specific now, so that the content of the lesson would be more and more in line and more aligned, yes, to what we are learning about today, which is about writing a review of a novel or a story. So remember, guys, if you have a question, if there's something you do not understand, please use the chat. The chat is open. You can ask your question, and I promise you that I will answer your question. Are there any questions? Are there any questions? Okay, I see a couple of no's in the chat, a couple of no's in the chat. All right, then, okay. Since there are no more questions, then let me continue. Right. So, yes, extra tips to write a review of a novel or a story. Okay. First things first, remember, write down the title of the story or the title of the novel. Okay, I think that really is simple enough. And one thing that we should need to remember is that when you write down the title of the story or the novel, you should also write the name of the author. Okay, so let me demonstrate this with an example right now on the slide. So, as an example, right, e.g., right. So, as an example, let's say the adventures of Dr. X, right? So the name of our novel in this case is The Adventures of Dr. X. So it is The Adventures of Dr. X by J D Ram. Okay, so there's no such a book. I just started it from my own head. Okay, right. So yes, I don't want anybody saying, say I looked for the adventures of Dr. X and I couldn't find it. So yes, guys, so this is the name of the book. Let me write it in bold. And that is the author. So it is something like that, okay? Because remember, the title of a novel or a story, it really does go with the name of the author. Okay, all right. I see in the chat Tyrese saying he was gonna look for this book. Sorry, Tyrese, there is no such book. I just came up with this title in my own head, and maybe I should write it. Ne? I'll see. I'll see. I'll see. So yes, remember that the title of the story or that novel has to be written down, and usually the title of the story, it does go with the author. Okay, remember, the story does not write itself, the novel does not write itself. There is somebody, there is an author who writes it. Okay, there is an author who writes it. Therefore it will be good there to just, you know to just write the name of the author, right? So the next thing is, in your review, you will briefly summarize the plot of the story or the novel. Okay, so you will summarize the plot. All right. So there are some things that which you need to remember when you summarize the plot. Okay. So when you summarize the plot, when, when you summarize the plot, okay, the things that which should be there will be the main characters. Okay. Okay. Will be protagonists. Remember, what is a protagonist? Let's see if you guys remember. What is a protagonist? Somebody write to us in the chat what a protagonist is. We did this in lesson 23, lesson 24, when we spoke about the literature features. We did say that one of the things that a literature has is protagonists. So what are protagonists? Okay, I will still wait for the answer of protagonists. So one thing so things you will need to include when you summarize the plot. You will have to say something about protagonists, okay, antagonists, as well as well as the conflict and the climax. Okay, so these are the things we went through in lesson 23 or lesson 24. So you can please go check it out. But let me just re- remind you of these things. Remember what I said on that on those previous lessons. We said that a protagonist is the main character. Okay, so you cannot say anything about the plot of a novel or a story without saying anything about the main character. Okay, the main character really is everything. You can't say anything about the plot without mentioning anything about the main character. So the main character is the protagonist. Okay, then the antagonist is the what? The antagonist is the people who is in conflict or who is against the protagonist. Okay, so remember, we can also use our knowledge of prefixes and suffixes to to figure out the meaning of antagonist. Remember, we said a protagonist is a main character, right? And pro means to be in support of something. Okay, then an antagonist, then it will be somebody. So you will see that anta here, it is the prefix anti, which means against. So therefore, the antagonist is the person who is against the protagonist. Okay, right. Then we have the conflict because the antagonist is against the protagonist. That creates what we call a conflict, and that conflict will need to be resolved at the end. And because of that conflict, there will be a certain level in the novel or in the story that we call the climax. So the climax is the highest point of the story. It is the highest point of the novel. Okay, and it is at the climax where we know how the conflict affects the main character as well as the antagonist. Okay, so even when you summarize the plot in your review, you'll have to say something about these four things: the protagonist, the antagonist, as well as the conflict and the climax. Okay, yes. Then you'll also have to comment on the background as well as the setting of the story or the novel. Remember what the background and settings are, right? The background and the setting, it talks about the time and the place that the story or the novel takes place. Okay, so therefore, you will need to say something about the background and the setting. Why? Because it is the background and the setting which really affect, for the most part, the plot of the story, right? So, so in my example there of Adventures of Dr. X, ne, if we assume that Dr. X is a superhero who can, okay, if we assume that Dr. X is a superhero who can fly, you will realize that the background and the setting of that story will also affect him, okay? Because if Dr. X is inside the ocean, he is somewhere in the Atlantic Ocean. Thing is, he cannot fly in water, okay? So you will realize that the background of the story and its setting, they really affect how the plot goes, and therefore you really have to say something about them. You really have to comment about them, okay? So remember again, you will have to express your opinion of how good the story or the novel was. Okay, so give us your opinion. Was the story good? Was the novel good? Give us your opinion. That okay, the Adventures of Dr. X. It was good. It is a good story. It is a good story, but it doesn't stop there. After you tell us how good of a story it is, then you will need to give good reasons for your opinions. Okay, so you can say that the adventures you so you can say that the adventures of Dr. X is good because Dr. X is such a relatable superhero. Kids will really want to be just like him. And he really inspires everybody of every age. So those are some of the things So those are some of the things that which you really need to be writing about, and you really need to have them in mind. Okay. So after that, at the end of your review, you may write your name as the reviewer. Remember, I said that when you write this review, you are not just the learner, now you are also a reviewer. Therefore, it will be good for you, and it is excellent for you to write your name as the reviewer as well as the date. Okay, at the end of the review. Okay, so since I see in the chat that it is Tyrese who seems to be so much interested in this story, so at the end you can say Tyrese and your surname Tyrese, and then the date at which you wrote the review, and you write that at the end of the review. Is there any question? Because this is the end of the lesson. Is there any question? Is there any question? All right, so as a takeaway message, I've said remember to use the writing process method. Okay, so do you all remember it? The writing process method. It is those 6 steps that which it is. It is those 6 steps that which we use when we write transactional text. Okay, the planning, the drafting, the proofreading, the editing, all those steps, okay, that is the ones that which we use, right? So remember all those steps you will be using as you use these steps, okay? You will need to realize to figure out how would you summarize the plot in a way that it will make sense and it will be meaningful to somebody who will be reading your review. you know you will also need to draft the plot you will have summarized, your comment on the background, your opinions, checking for grammatical errors, checking for spelling errors, checking for all those things to make sure that what you are trying to communicate with your review would be communicated, right? So yes, remember the writing process method, because it is very important, because with every transactional text we use the writing process method, right? Okay, so I have a helpful link for you. I have a helpful link for you. You can take a screenshot and go to that address, and it's grammar.yourdictionary.com/style dash and dash usage guide to writing a book review.html. So if you go to this link, it will show you, you know, some different ways of writing reviews based on the formats of the books, and there are also several examples of reviews there, because of time constraints, we are not able to go through an example of a written review in this lesson. So my apologies for that. But here is a link that which could be enjoyable. When you're bored this weekend, even okay, this weekend you can just look at this and see how reviews are written and appreciate that, so that you can be better prepared to write a review. Okay, yes. So although the lesson is over, but the conversation is not. You can still follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Okay, and do not forget, guys, we are continuing with our classes even on Monday. Come join us on Monday. It will be a new lesson, another lesson. We are continuing to learn. We are continuing to go to school on this online platform, STEM Lockdown Digital School. Okay, so So from all of us here at STEM Lockdown Digital School, we say goodbye, we say take care, we love you. You have a very wonderful weekend. See you on Monday. Bye bye.